let's talk about value creation, right? And let's talk about in a market this size, what moves the needle for you as an appraiser in terms of valuing a property? Is it income, land appreciation, tenant type, future appreciation? What is it for you?
Again, that's kind of like a loaded question because especially when it comes to commercial valuations, every property is unique. There's a unique set of physical characteristics. There's a unique set of income characteristics, locational characteristics. There's so many things that play a part in what the value is going to be that there's no cookie cutter way to look at it. And finding like for like assets are very challenging here.
Yeah.
There's certain things that users want. That's clear, right? So if you have those features that users want, say for instance, generally here in Guam, we're underparked everywhere. It doesn't matter what kind of property. Apartment, retail, office, industrial, you're underparked, right? So if you have an apartment building that has 2 spaces per unit, that's going to drive that value because people are going to want it more than if you have an apartment building with 1 space per unit, right? And I don't know who drives 1 car here on the island. As a household, we're probably averaging 3+.
Fair. So, a lot of extended families, yeah.
Yeah, and office is the same situation. You'll see a lot of the older office buildings, particularly in downtown Acatnia. It's underparked. There's not enough parking, right? You be parking on the streets or whatever. Parking is a pretty good indicator. Retail is going to be the same situation. The highest rental rates are probably going to be properties that have adequate parking to support the use. For industrial, like now, it's funny because industrial is a little bit weird because a lot of these contractors, it's getting expensive. So they'll look for land and throw containers on it for temporary use, right? Because they can't afford, either they can't afford or they can't find. It's one of those 2 things. But for industrial uses, you want a low lot coverage. You want to have as much open space as possible. Then you can navigate your trucks, your trailers to come in and out. You can also have yard storage and staging areas. So the more open space you have on an industrial property, that's going to be more favorable than if you have a really tight site coverage where you're over like 35%, where the building is taking up a big chunk and you're barely meeting the minimum requirements, even by zoning standards, right? So those are that's how the not only the user perspective, but how legally things are kind of come together. I think a lot of people think of this stuff in the back of their mind, but those are real world things, right? Because as an appraiser, I can't outsmart the market. I'm not smarter than the market. If somebody doesn't want to pay for it because the ceiling height's too low for my use, and most of the people are saying, I want 50 cents for that space, I can't say it's $1 just because one person wants it at $1, right? It's the whole widgets thing, right? You're going to price it based on, is there an adequate substitute for it? So there's this also principle of substitution. Okay. If I can find a like replacement, and if there's enough like replacements, that's just going to drive down the pricing, right? Because there's going to be more available stuff and it's going to be more competitive. But if it's very few, then the pricing is going to get driven up, right?
Yeah, so it's really in the eye of the beholder in a lot of different ways, and how the beholder is going to capitalize on the opportunity, and how effectively they capitalize on the opportunity.
Right.
Because it could have been a beautiful location, but they're just not using it properly.
Right.
Or leveraging it in the right way. So, just in that frame of value creation, it's easy. You could build a new building today, open it up. Let's say like Landmark, right? Landmark building, right? They built that building, right?
Yep.
But what does that do to the market? Does that create new demand, or does that steal?
I would say something like Landmark, or even what AutoSpot did across from AK, repurposing that building. I don't necessarily know if it creates demand. I think it just shifts the existing tenant base. So there's no positive absorption of space. So I'll give you one example. Docomo was in Century Plaza. Then they moved to the old Ben Franklin. How long was the old Ben Franklin sitting on the market?
Right.
Right? So there was no users for Ben Franklin until Docomo wanted to be there. Mm-hmm. So Docomo vacates Century Plaza and moves into their new headquarters. And then now what is Century Plaza doing? They're trying to figure out who's going to take that space.
Right.
Right? So there's a lot of these bigger players, they just move from location to location. And you're going to see that often with Gov Guam agencies too, right? They're going to be there for a long time. They're going to vacate a space, move somewhere else, but there's nobody to fill that gap once they leave.
Right.
So when Sam's Club was here, right? That place was vacant until Rev and Tax went in there.
Right.
And then if Rev and Tax leaves there, I don't know who's going to come in and use that space. Right? It might be 10 years before you find somebody.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a factor. And Sam's Club is a subsidiary of Walmart. In case anybody wants to know, and they used to be in the Rev and Tax building, was a Costco operation or something like that, out of the Philippines, right?
Right.
I think, and that was. I don't even remember ever going in there. It didn't last very long.
Yeah, it didn't last very long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then now owned by, now leased by the Rev and Tax, but maybe not for long, right?
Yeah, from my understanding, that lease is coming up, so they don't know what they're going to do, whether they're going to extend or find another location. Right?
But even at that, that's 50,000 square feet. Like, who needs a 50,000 square foot footprint anymore?
Nobody.
Not even the Department of Rev and Tax. I mean, what does their workforce look like in 10 years? What does anybody's workforce look like in 10 years? What does our footprint look like? So, yeah, that's a tough question.
Yeah, and it's like for brick and mortar buildings, but particularly, so if you tie big box retailers like a Sam's Club or Walmart, Costco, even Ross and a lot of these guys in the States. So what's happening is they don't need as much square footage. So there's this big push to build as big as possible and even cannibalize each other, right? So I used to do some appraisals for Walmart, and what they would do is they would build a location, start capturing the entire market, and then if a competitor was going to plan on coming in, they would build a superstore across the street, which is even bigger, and then they'll let the other space go dark.
Right.
And then there's like in the Inland Empire, you see like these bunch of 100,000 square foot buildings that are just empty.
Just to scare the other guy away.
Yeah. So, and that's kind of what's happening in the retail world is because of e-commerce, they don't need as much square footage. They don't need all the display area. They don't need, people are more comfortable now ordering without physically touching it, physically seeing it, trying it on. So, yeah, you're right. If 50,000 square foot of space comes up, well, who's going to take that?
Right.
How do you even carve that up? Can you even carve up 50,000 square feet to smaller uses? Other things like what's the zoning? You might think, okay, let's repurpose for industrial, but if it's a commercial zone, you can't put an industrial in there. User in there, right?
Yeah.
So there's all these little things that kind of drive what's happening.
So how do you differentiate between market absorption, like meaningful market absorption, and like creation of new demand?
That
or artificial occupancy, I guess. Yeah.
It's like what we were talking about earlier. Stabilized occupancy is easier to gauge for industrial and apartments because it's clear that there is higher demand than supply. And then retail and other commercial properties is probably case-by-case basis, and everything's going to be factored. Is there enough parking? What kind of security does it have? Is it a 3-story building with no elevator? All those things come into play, right? So then that's going to drive the occupancy. And you'll see a common trend even with commercial buildings. Certain buildings are going to have close to 100% occupancy, and then you're going to see other ones that are like at 70, right? If you take the market average as a whole, it might be 90% might be stabilized. But that's an average, right? These individual properties aren't likely operating at those levels.
Right.
You know? So that's kind of the hard part, even with value creations. Like, say, for instance, we were talking about Landmark. Landmark comes into the market, and AutoSpots come into the market, and they're charging super high rents with full common area collections. They're running triple nets, right? So they're charging the highest rent that Guam has probably seen in 10 years.
I agree. I was like, what?
Right? Yeah, right? It's crazy how much they were charging when they first hit the market, right?
Sure.
It's whether is that sustainable going forward, who knows, right? But normally it's like buying a new car. You pay the most when it's new. When you go try to sell it used, the value is going to depreciate, right? So I think a lot of times people love new buildings, so they'll pay premium rents to go in there. But after a few years, it's going to be old, and they might not be able to generate that premium top rent anymore. But what happens is when these items hit the market and then you start averaging things out, it's going to skew it up, right?
Yeah.
And then everybody's going to think, oh, retail's going up. Retail rents are going up. But reality, our market is so small, those little commercial buildings have a significant impact on that.
Well, we're just like in that where I see the opportunity too is professional management. Like you have an organization where they built this building to as a function of I'm just going to use it for my own internal use, but as an aside, I'm going to start renting these buildings, and now they've aged out of the business, and now we have this familial building, and we're just mom and pop. I got a building manager, and maybe I have more than one, maybe I have multiple properties, but if someone was to come in there, renovate it, think about the tenant mix, professionally manage it. Therein is an opportunity where you can squeeze those cash flow margins, right? Maybe you have a better debt coverage ratio. You get better access to financing, so buying it at a better price makes more sense for you. Maybe you have ongoing concerns, like you have a construction apparatus where you can more easily keep up with the property management and the demand that's coming there, and that internalizes that cost. So that's how you see these opportunities kind of come, where you can margin into these buildings and it makes sense for you. And then you can become a professional landlord, and that value is there, but you just have to have that foresight and that plan to execute. I think it works. It might work for some people, but I don't know if it's going to generally work for everyone. Because I don't think everybody can get their rents above $2, right? Because again, it's just a function of the demand. How many retail tenants out there here on Guam can afford to pay that type of rent? And I guarantee you, the lion's share of the businesses, they're capping out at a certain point when it comes to their all-in payment, which is their rent, their utilities, and other expenses that they have to pass through to the landlord, right? There's a point where it just starts to cap out. And no matter how nice the building is, the people that are going to rent it can't afford it. And that's going to be majority of your market, right? So no matter how much you professionally manage, there's a point of diminishing return, right? You can put all this effort into increasing amenities, making everything look nicer, more competitive to like a Landmark or to AutoSpots building. But then you go market it, those guys already got the handful of tenants who can afford it, right? Now you've invested all this with professional management, which it increases the cost, but you haven't moved that rent needle that much, right? So I think that's why we see a lot of situations where they don't opt for that because their margins are already tight as it is where it's at, right? And if they want to maintain it's all a give and take, right? If they want to maintain that 90% occupancy, then their rents have to be at a certain rate. Yes.
If they want to try to charge the like $250, $3 rent, their occupancy level is probably going to be like 50%, right? So it's all tied in that way. It's like you can't get one and not factor in something else. It's you have to like start balancing all this stuff out.
I agree. And so with that, it's like that shiny new car, kind of like it pulls you in, but at the same time, once you have that advantage, you can apply your strategy and try and get to the place where it does make sense. But over time, it won't unless you shift and execute in that way.